Hello and welcome to the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Sarah Brown and I'm joined by my colleague Chris Collins here at Garden Organic. We're here to share with you tips about how to garden and grow the organic way. It's October, so we'll be celebrating those autumn tasks. And our post bag includes questions on whether to plant a hedge, is it okay to have spiders in your potting shed, and what to do with all those green tomatoes. Our guest this month is the wonderful George Anderson. Chris travelled up to Scotland to chat with his old mentor and discuss his long history of gardening.
When I got into horticulture and gardening, I was the bottom of the pile of three. Even the dog was above me.
But before we start, I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, the Organic Gardening Catalogue. Why not check out their catalogue online at organiccatalogue.com. You'll find a complete range of organic gardening products from seeds and plants to equipment. I urge you to look at their range of organic narcissi bulbs. There's the ever-cheerful little tete-a-tete and the gorgeous pure white Thalia. That's organiccatalogue.com. And if you're a member of Garden Organic, you'll get 10% off. So now I'm off to meet Chris in the potting shed. Morning, Chris. How are you?
Morning, Sarah. Very well. How about you?
Oh, I'm good, but it's October. It's the end of summer, and we have to think positive because it's very sad losing those lovely sun-filled long gardening days. Would you agree?
Oh, I certainly would. One of the benefits of living in the UK is those lovely long days, isn't it? Those evenings, I can get home from work at 5ish and still have 2-3 hours on the allotment, and that's all sort of going now. But on another side of it, I love autumn. I kind of think almost as like a give thanks period because I've had this sort of amazing summer. On my allotment, for example, it's been so full and so much going on, flowers and produce, but it was just a handful of seeds, when it was the spring. And now, plants are not stupid. It's coming to the end. The days are getting shorter. It's getting cooler. They're like, okay, I'm going to have a little kip. It might be if I'm deciduous, I might lose my leaves. If I'm an annual, I might just overwinter as seed. Or if I'm a herbaceous, I might go under the ground as roots. But I'm going to call it a day. And then next spring will be renewal. And I kind of really admire how intelligent nature is. And October certainly makes me feel that way. Plus also, it's the time for ideas, Sarah.
Oh, you've got ideas, have you, Chris?
Always. Mainly above my station, I must say. But, but yes, obviously it's about thinking about what you want to do the following year, or even through the winter maybe, when you want to redesign stuff, re-landscape stuff. It's always lots of things jumble in my head. I tend to, as a gardener, I always kind of reflect on what I've had to deal with through this season and how I could maybe change it for next season. A good example is my allotment next to me has been left wild for quite a lot of the time. People take it on, can't handle it, and leave again. So I've got all this seed.
That's quite common, isn't it? Because allotments are big spaces.
Well, I think that, people get a false impression. They see the telly and they see garden shows and they go, this will be easy. And it doesn't necessarily work out that way. It's maybe a good point to say share allotments. If you're new to it, split it up between 3 or 4 of you. But we digress. I think that I'm thinking about all this seed that keeps flying into my allotments. It means that sometimes I can't keep on top of it. And I want to think about how I tackle that next year. So my mind is ticking over. And as always, Sarah, I'm thinking about what do I want to plant.
So what do you think you can put in there, Chris?
Well, maybe I could slow it down by a bit of hedging along that side. I might even go exotic and plant a row of artichoke, maybe down there, those big grey silvery leaves. Quite a lot of plots on my site have those. Maybe that'll stop the transport of things. The other thing is maybe I'll do more perennial planting, trying to fill it out more. Like as all organic gardeners, we don't want to see soil really. We want to keep the soil healthy, but we want it to be full, don't we? Because it lowers the watering.
I think that's a very good point because I think this time of year, particularly in the veg patch, there's quite a lot of bare soil appearing because beans have finished or our tomatoes have finished or whatever, and we've pulled up our potatoes. And those bare patches, you want to protect the soil over winter. So what I'm putting down is a lot of leaf mold. I happen to have some straw as well because I keep hens. So leaf mold, straw, anything that's this organic matter, it may not be particularly nutritious for the soil, but that's not a problem. You don't want to feed the soil this time of year, but you're looking after it through the winter. You're protecting it. I like to think of it as like putting a duvet down to keep the soil life inside it warm and protected through the winter.
Yeah, because it stops all those things you don't want happening, like leaching, nutrients being washed through, waterlogging, soil structure. If you put in green manures, for example, and the mulch, keep the worms happy, keep the microorganisms happy. So just always think of your soil as a living organism. You need to take care of that and keep it healthy. And this time of year particularly important, as you say, because gaps start to appear everywhere, don't they, as you're pulling stuff out.
And to me, also, one of the joys of October is that smell of the soil, that smell of the rotting leaves and whatever. It's a very, very strong autumn smell. I love it. It just brings up this whole time of year. You're moving from summer salads to warming stews. You know, that whole mentality, as you say, about of change of seasons. I think it's magic. I really do. And it is a perfect time to replan your growing space. I'm looking at my herbaceous border, for instance, and realizing that the whole thing has got to be dug over. Unfortunately, I've got ground elder in one end of it. So I'm going to dig the whole bed over, lift all the perennials that are in there, decide which ones I want to keep and which ones didn't perform very well, don't need them anymore. And I'm going to divide them and replant them once I've taken out all that ground elder root system. It's really good process to make a note of what worked and what didn't.
Exactly. And remember that because our plants are entering dormancy, this is the time so you can lift them, split them, move them, divide them, get rid of them, put more in. Autumn particularly, I'm a big autumn planter. It's the best time of year to do it. You've got the whole winter for the plant to establish itself by putting down its roots. It's not concentrating on photosynthesis and it'll concentrate on root production. This is a time for you to play with your pallets.
I agree. And the other thing, of course, in October, we can't possibly miss mentioning is seed saving. I'm trying to save seed everywhere I can for the simple reason that if it works, brilliant. If it doesn't, it hasn't cost me anything. So I'm looking at all the flowers that have seeded themselves amongst my vegetables, things like marigolds, nasturtiums, snapdragons, larkspur. They've all put themselves in there. I'm now saving the seed heads into envelopes. Who knows? Maybe they'll grow again next year. I was reading up about stratification, Chris, because I read that yarrow particularly needs stratification. And by that, I understood that the seed needs to get cold. We need to reflect the seasons. So the seed needs to be cold before it can germinate. Now, I'm going to put mine in the fridge for a month as if it's been in deep winter. And then when it comes out again, it's ready to germinate. Have you tried this process?
Yeah, stratification comes in many forms. And I have to say, this is the genius of plants, the ability to completely slow down, almost stop being alive and in the form of a seed until conditions are right to start to grow. This is why they've been around longer than anything else. It's just genius. So you're perfectly right. Plants from temperate parts of the world, like Achillea, even like our big trees, our broadleaf trees, they need periods of cold to tell the seed, I don't want to germinate when it's frosty, otherwise I'm not going to last. And then it gets warm. Right, now's my chance to go. But plants do it in many ways. A brilliant example is the poppy. And what poppy needs, it needs light to germinate. So it will sit in the dark and it will just wait. No point trying to germinate if conditions aren't right. And then obviously during the fields of the war, the bombing campaigns, it turned up the poppy seeds and they all germinated. And they can live 100 years under the soil in the dark before you get right opportunity. Another brilliant example is if you go to America, the big redwoods, the seeds are the size of a bit of dust, but it needs fire, it needs heat in order to germinate. It happens in many ways, in many, many different ways. It is absolute genius. If you want an example of how amazing plants are, look no further than stratification. It's incredible.
Oh, and what about bulbs? Just the thought that this bulb is down deep, deep, deep dark in the soil, and yet somehow in its DNA, it knows when to start sprouting. And I know a lot of people are going to be ordering bulbs this month. If you do order bulbs, please try and make them organic ones. You've talked before about the amount of pesticides that are used in bulb production, Chris, and I think it's something, if we can, we should avoid it.
Well, they soak them in them, don't they? I mean, it's a big industry. The movement of the organic bulb is really growing now, and it's done through agroforestry permaculture, so they plant them in with other plants. They do a 6-year cycle, which means that natural balance then arrives in the soil to keep the pest and disease down. It's a longer process, but it is getting more and more popular, and that means it's going to get cheaper and more available to us. And obviously at the moment there's problems with, we don't want to go into politics, but things coming in and out of the country, but that leaves at some point. Always look to organic bulbs. And I grew nothing but organic bulb on my balcony this spring, and it was a wonderful display, and I was chuffed with that. It wasn't too expensive, and I just got this incredible display without putting poisons down. I'm proud of that. That's really good.
Excellent. I'm glad. And of course, since we're talking about planning and what worked and what didn't work, I guess we've also got that mentality maybe of tidying up a bit in the garden now that the summer growth is over. as always, the big message is don't be too tidy, because the garden isn't just yours. The garden also belongs to the insects, the small mammals, the birds, all the other wildlife that lives in it. And they need shelter during the winter. So a pile of dead leaves, twigs, grass stems will provide that perfect shelter for them. You're quite careful on your allotment, aren't you, Chris, about that?
It's interesting because being a trained gardener in my early years, we were very obsessive about neatness and tidiness. You know, you edged the lawn and you pulled the weeds out when you saw them. But it's interesting how it's changed. Now you start to see it differently as an industry, but also as the general public, is that it's a shared space. We use this expression over and over again, don't we, Sarah? But I am, as a gardener, I like things to be quite tidy. I just do. And so what I tend to do is I deliberately, quite artistically, I like to think, make habitat piles. I have them through the allotment on the winter. So it's not haphazard. I'm planning it, but I'm making that provision because I want that to be a shared space. And obviously winter's a hard time for wildlife and you need to make sure it's looked after.
I like that. I like the idea that being untidy doesn't mean to say it's got to look ugly as well. I think there's a thinking behind it. And then, of course, finally, we're bringing plants in this month before the worst of the frosts. Pelargoniums, begonias, those plants that we love and we can keep growing over the seasons. Just if you do, I think it's important to check that they're not diseased in any way, because you don't want to bring the diseases indoors. So make sure that any leaves that are dead or dying or looking diseased, strip them off and only bring in a really healthy plant.
Yeah, I tend to reduce mine as well. I tend to reduce the leaf surface area. They're going into dormancy. So if I have a pelargonium, I've got some beautiful pelargoniums on the balcony, I will take them down by 2/3. So there's less leaf, less foliage. They're not transpiring so heavily, and I'll sit them quite dry inside over the winter. I'm a big seed sower, so a lot of my stuff is seasonal. Most of it will go on the compost bin, but I've got a few odd favourites out there that I want to bring in the house.
Yeah. And Chris, we're back to your favourite bit, which is your plant of the month. What are you going for this month?
Well, I'm going to go for Corylus this month, the hazel, okay? This is a native plant. You'll see it many places, but it's actually quite a clever plant in the way that you can use it in your garden for other things as well. If you left it as just one tree, it would get quite tall, 30 foot maybe. You don't need to do that. It will coppice. So for many, many years, we've used both hazel and hornbeam as a timber, as a supply for crafts, country crafts, also to grow your sweet peas up, etc., etc. So if you want one, don't worry if you've got a small space, because you're just going to coppice it, which means you let it put on some growth, then you cut it hard back and let it shoot again, and it'll become multi-stemmed. You get these beautiful growths on it, quite thin stems on it, very, very beautiful. And what you do is you thin that out every year as the years go by. I think if you put it in a big pot, and you fed it and watered it properly, you could probably even grow it in a pot as well. But it's both a very beautiful plant. It's what I call a backbone plant. So if you put it in a border, you can plant lower around it. It's got these beautiful big leaves, really beautiful autumn colour. The birds love nesting in it. It's a win-win all round.
Sounds lovely. So that's a hazel, Corylus.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Okay, well, look, enjoy your October and enjoy your planning and your hot cups of tea when the weather gets cold. We'll talk next month.
Thanks, Sarah. Good luck with lifting your perennials.
Thank you. And that damn ground elder.
Cheers, Sarah.
Bye then. And now it's time for our special guest, George Anderson. George has a long and distinguished horticultural career, from a pot-washing gardener's lad to head of the School of Horticulture at the Edinburgh Botanic Gardens. Chris was one of his students back in the day, and he took great pleasure in meeting him earlier this year.
Well, welcome listeners to the Garden Organic podcast interview. I am treated today because I am in sunny Joppa in the lovely city of Edinburgh with my old mentor, George Anderson. I think that may be quite a lot of you might know him because he's a TV star these days. But actually, there's much, much more to him than that. And a horticulturist, and I'm going to say this without giving away our ages, but I think between us, George, there's about 85 years of professional gardening here.
Well, I've been gardening since I was 16, so that's 61 years.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's a lot of wisdom build up. Now, I've got to ask about background. How did you fall into it?
I was born into a farming sort of family. Father was a smallholder, and uncles had farms. And when we used to go and visit, though, the first thing that happened when you went to visit your relatives was you got dragged out to the garden.
Right.
And you had to go round the garden, and so you were kind of absorbing all this information by osmosis. Now, I had one uncle who used to take me out fishing and things like that, and he was the guy that I sort of focused on. But he was a sheep dealer, So when I was at school, when I was asked in third year what I wanted to do when I left school, I wanted to be a shepherd.
Right.
But
So you always had that longing for outdoor
well,
space.
yeah, to be outside and to be involved with that, because school was, I can't say that school was a terribly exciting time for me. I don't think it was a place where I really achieved as much as everybody else wanted me to. So Mother's are wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Mother had seen an advert in the local paper where one of the local estates was looking for a gardener's boy. So that was how I started, and that place was Smeaton Gardens, East Lincoln.
So you started like real sort of proper apprentice then, right at the bottom, washing the pots and doing the weeding and doing all the physical stuff.
And all of a sudden I realised that, I left school with not one academic qualification. I had nothing, right? No highers, no lowers, no O-levels. When I got into horticulture and gardening, I mean, I was the bottom of the pile of 3. Even the dog was above me. So I was the one that was the butt of jokes, but I learnt. And that was the thing. I was taught extremely well by the head gardener. And we had everything in the walled garden.
Yeah.
We had bedding plants, trees on the wall, we had vegetables, we had cut flowers, dahlias and things like that. We grew cauliflower plants and leek plants in frames, which we then pulled and bundled up into 25s and sent all over the country.
Right,
With our bedding plants then, it was all soil compost. I used to have to dig the soil out of the compost heaps that were in the wood, and bring it in and riddle it and mix it with peat, as we used then, and sand and all the rest of it, and put John in his base in it. And we used to get the fish boxes from the Deep Sea restaurant at the top of Leith Walk in Edinburgh, which you will know from your student days.
And you used them as seed trays and
stuff? We used them as seed trays. So that was where I started. And then I found that I can do this. So that gave me confidence. And it's a great story for youngsters, that once you get into something which you can do, just go with it. Get involved and just go with it.
How much has it changed, do you think, in practice between when you started off as a gardener's boy to here now, where we are now?
When I started, it was all soil-based compost.
So you were making your own, basically?
Making your own compost. You had 7 parts of soil, 3 parts of peat, 2 parts of sand.
You used to do it with wheelbarrows at the botanics.
Oh, that's right. And then you mix your fertiliser in with that. And then what happened after that was that we had these UCA composts, the University of California composts that came in, which were the pure peat ones.
Right.
Because all of a sudden peat was the king. It was the thing which was you were able to grow almost anything in.
And it's kind of tidy, isn't it? Yeah, and it's tidy. It doesn't get too dirty, all that. Do you think that all plays a role? It's easy to package and move around.
That's right. And then remember that we went from that. We've now gone on to coir, which I'm not a fan of, because I don't believe that it's as viable as it is, as people say, because it's got to come from such a distance.
Yeah, because the air carbon involved.
That's right. So I now, in my own gardening, I use the wool and bracken one,
right,
which is the Lake District product, and I also use one which is pure bark based. I tried to keep away from the wood fibre and the domestic waste one, or the garden waste one.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because
the domestic waste one tends to make a good mulch, but I wouldn't be growing my seeds in it. That's but it's interesting that you've gone, like most of us have, we've kind of moved, we've recognised the peat problem that we're moving away from it. Garden Organic is always promoting making your own compost, and I think because we're so used to everything being packaged and presented to us, people see that as a far off thing, but it's not that difficult to do, is it?
It's not. Well, I mean, I've got a compost heap at the allotment. I have an allotment as well, or 2 compost heaps, one that's in use and one that that's making itself. And then round the side of the house here, I've got 3 bays. So the middle one is where all the household scraps and everything else goes. That's the current one that we're filling up. The one on the right-hand side has had the compost put into it, and you keep adding to it, and it keeps going down, it's decomposing, and all the rest of it. And then the one on the left-hand side is the one that we filled last year. And on top of that, I will plant courgettes this year.
Right, you'll actually plant into
it. I'll plant courgettes into it, and we get a crop of courgettes off that. And then all of that will be cut, put into bags, and taken to the allotment.
Right.
And that feeds the allotment. But what's interesting is that, the tomatoes that you didn't use in your salad, you throw in, And so you've got tomato seedlings, you've got seedlings of courgettes, there were seedlings of squashes coming up, and apples. I didn't realise there were so many apples.
Well, at least you know you're on a healthy diet.
Well, that's right. That's right.
And I think it's also important, I think, with artificial fertilisers, one thing I've learned over the years is they're kind of quick fixes. So you put something on which is say Osmocote or a slow release, or called a slow release, but it has like a peak, a quick rush of fertiliser. Yeah. Whereas compost breaks down, it loses its nutrient much slower, doesn't it? So
it does.
And it also conditions the soil, so it's better for longevity.
It's a win-win situation. And if you want to go down the route of no dig, for example, it's quite good. Your own compost on the top. If you can put it down early and get the weeds to germinate, and then, you know, we used to talk about the stale seedbed technique, wasn't it? Where you rake the soil level and you left it for a while, and then the weeds germinate, and you hoe it, and then you leave it for a while, and then it germinates again, and you hoe them off again, and then you sow your seeds. You've not got any weed seeds left,
because you've let them they've come up to start with. Yeah. It's quite interesting as well. Sort of the environmental and the organic stuff's got real traction within our industry. But we were practicing quite a lot of this previously. When, like, the wooden trays is quite a good example. Cause and if anything broke, it was fixed in-house, wasn't it? And this kind of thing. Do you think this is where we need to be going back to as an industry?
Consumers, I think we can go back that way. Right. I think in home gardening, I think we can go that way. I mean, for example, I'm friendly with the local fishmonger here. So I use a lot of expanded polystyrene boxes. Yeah. Right? People say, oh, you shouldn't be using that. And all that. Why not? Because it's where my apples get stored outside. Yeah, so
you're not throwing them away.
No. They've been there for about 5 years.
So the issue is if it's single use, it's what we do with the stuff.
Well, single-use plastics, for example, milk bottle cartons and the fruit cartons that you get your strawberries or your grapes in, these deep ones, I use them for sowing seeds.
Yes, and so that's an interesting point. I keep plastic pots, because that's what I tend, when you buy stuff, it tends to come in there. And I keep a load of them, and I look at them sometimes and think, I shouldn't be doing this, it's building up. I use every one of them. Every one of them has got a plant in. Oh, yeah. And then they'll all be put back in the tray at the end of the...
That's right.
And they'll go
Not
again next year.
Not necessarily washed, though. I do worry about the single plastic use. But the black pots, for example, I go into the supermarket and you see these deep pots which are used for the black pots which are used for the flowers. The flower coming.
Good for runner beans and stuff like that.
Well, I grow my daffodil bulbs. I grow a lot of daffodil bulbs for showing and things like that. I grow a lot of them in them. But then I also use those. I cut them up and use them as labels. Right. It's brilliant. Yeah. And a black label in the soil with white writing on it never shows up. It doesn't show up until you look for it. Whereas a white label,
it's right in your face. So that's a good tip, isn't it? Out to you. So you are bringing that recycling.
Yeah.
We've always been quite good at using assets as gardeners, haven't we? We've never been wasteful, I don't think.
That's right.
I think there's a little bit of a peak of people being interested in our subject, but also we'll bring in the environmental and the organic concerns. And so, what would be your advice to them if they were going to come into the trade now?
Oh,
that's a big question, isn't it?
That's a killer. That one. That's a conversation stopper. Well, I would say that the one thing that people have got to be interested in when they come into the industry is they've got to be interested in plants. Because they're not going to make millions.
No.
This is not an industry where you get paid huge amounts of money. But by Jove, it's an industry where you can get a huge amount of satisfaction and where you can be doing something which has enormous benefits, not just for you, but for everybody else that you're supplying, everybody else that's your customer, everybody else that you're dealing with if you go into local authority. Think of all the people in parks that you have helped to enjoy open space, to enjoy plants. The number of people, Chris, that have taken up gardening during these difficult times with lockdown and COVID and all the rest of it is absolutely astonishing. But the thing that really surprises you, I'm sure, and me, is that people, when they start trying to grow things, they've forgotten.
Yeah.
They don't know.
Yeah.
And it's a blissful ignorance. It's an ignorance which is not a nasty ignorance because nobody has shared it with them.
Yeah.
It's not telling, it's sharing.
Yes. And you touch on that thing that's really interesting is the spiritual benefits, but also what we can, what we have to offer society as gardeners is quite important, I think, isn't it? As people. Yeah. It's a very underrated subject, isn't it?
Well, we're very down to earth, if you'll excuse the pun. We are. We've got our hands in the soil, got our feet in the ground, and we're the people who are dealing with things which are day to day. And the healing aspects of plant growing are enormous. If we look at the benefits of therapeutic horticulture to people who have had mental illness, who are recovering from some traumatic event in their life, the fact that they've got to go out and look after a plant is a focus which they cannot get away from. It's like having a pet.
Yeah.
You know, you have, I can't not do that because I've got to go and water the plants. I've got to come out into the garden. Every morning I come out and have a look around. You'll be the same on your balcony.
Yeah.
You'll be out, you have a look around, you take in the air, you have a look to see what's going on, you listen to the birds. We're outside, and that has huge benefits.
I think it's, if you're struggling as a person, and you're relying on other people a lot, say it could be because of physical problems or mental problems. Having a plant, I always think having a plant that switches it around. You know, the plant needs you, and you bond with the plant. And
your focus changes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about, and that is a freedom. That's a freedom, isn't it? That's quite liberating.
It also shows you that you are important because you're needed. You're needed by this entity, which is a plant. And this growing system, you can't walk away from it. You know? But the excitement in a child or older people now who had never experienced it before, of sowing something, seeing it growing, nurturing it, and then eating it, for goodness sake.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And so I wonder, we've got these, they reckon 3 million people have taken up gardening during lockdown. Yeah. That could be quite important for the gardening industry, I think, for organic practices, for environmental stuff. How do we make sure we kind of retain that, do you think? That's another big question.
Well, that's a huge question. I mean,
but it's quite an important one, isn't it?
Well, I think there's got to be some political intervention here, and we don't want to go into the realms of politics. But I think that government has got to accept the huge benefits there are from plants generally.
Yeah.
Now, I was astonished the other day. It was an item in the papers about heat islands in cities. And all of a sudden I've discovered if they plant trees, they can lower the temperature.
Yeah.
Can you remember back to the 1970s?
When
we were talking about the same thing in the lecture room at the Botanics?
I do indeed. And it's interesting because we were planting more trees back then than we are now.
Absolutely.
So it's all like people are thinking this is a new discovery, but we've known these benefits for a while. But where there maybe I would argue there's been a problem is our undermining of the funding for our parks and places like this. And so you touch. I know we don't want to get into politics, but there has to be investment, doesn't there?
I think, as practitioners, I would never call myself an expert because every day is a school day.
Yes,
every day you learn something new. So I would say that as practitioners, we've got to keep banging the drum about the benefits of horticulture, about the benefits of plants, about the importance of plants to the planet. Well, why not?
Yeah, which is quite important, isn't it? Not? It's kind of important, isn't it? I mean, we're pretty done. If we don't save the planet, then we've got a bit of an issue.
We have. Well, as we get older, as you will find, Chris, the longer you sit in the one spot, the more of the things we knew come back round.
I think there's definitely.
It's a recycling process.
I think so. I mean, having becoming really interested in all the organic stuff, I always kind of think that I have this discussion because a lot of youngsters, they like the idea of coming to horticulture, but like to go into design. It's always design, and I always say to myself, well, actually, a garden is created by the love and care of a gardener. Not by a pen and a paper. So it's that interaction, isn't it? That kind of...
I'm not a garden designer. I don't do design.
Yeah.
But I can sit at a window and I can look out and I can say, well, I could do with such and such over there.
Yeah. Also, you kind of coming back to plants again, is that having that knowledge. I always really encourage everyone to do this. Just find out a little bit about it. How big is it going to get? When's it going to flower? That kind of stuff. So build up that knowledge. I mean, I don't think there's anything better in gardening than being able to walk down the road and recognise plants and see what they do.
But you had the benefit of that because you were in an area where plants were labelled.
Yeah.
Everything was there for you to absorb.
This is at the Botanics.
At the Botanics, it was there for you. And if you can recognise plants and you get excited about them, then you start to grow them. You walk around the garden, but it's actually it's a piece of social history.
Yeah,
because every plant has a person attached to it.
Yeah,
you know where you got it.
So it's got memories. It's got nostalgia.
Absolutely.
But it's got seasonal beauty. So it's hit
That's
all
right.
That.
That's right.
Yeah. But I want to talk a bit about the Botanics because I think Botanic gardens are very underrated establishments. And is Edinburgh doing well? Is it thriving? Is it out and about? Is it helping with all these community things you're involved with? Is it there?
Yeah, it's there. I mean, it's there. It has. The demonstration garden which they have a good outreach there. They have student plots in there which are for the HND students who are now doing the...
It's very plantsmanship based, isn't it?
Well, that was it. But the plantsmanship course, what we developed, what David Ray, that was my colleague then, and you'll remember David, and he and I worked together for 21 years, and he and I developed what we called a plant portfolio. And the students had to do plant profiles of up to 150 plants.
Right.
And what it did was it made them look at plants.
It
Made them really go and look, see where they came from, how you cultivate it, how you propagate it, how you do this, how you do that, how you use it in society and everything, of course. And there are now some brilliant plants people
coming out of there. Like
absolutely.
That. Quite interesting, because in the 90s, I remember there was all the courses in that, the sort of the BTEC places, learn how to lay a patio, learn how to build. There wasn't any emphasis on plants. And so I find now, if I want gardeners, I struggle to get good plantsmen because there wasn't an emphasis on one point. So you kind of fill in a gap there, aren't you?
But there's a problem in education now, is that a lot of it is non-practical based. There's no practical basis for it.
Which is a bit of a disaster for gardening, I'd argue.
It's an absolute disaster. It's an absolute disaster. We don't have anybody learning through their hands.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you can learn through your hands, by Jove, it sticks in your mind.
Yeah, you never forget it.
You've done it. The other thing that we're slitting about here, you mentioned hard landscaping and this and that. Think of the damage that all this hard landscaping has done.
Just cement alone as well. And it's incredibly environmentally bad.
Water shedding as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
driveways and all this.
Driveways, but there's also the CO2 that's used up or created while you're making it. Then you put it down and it sheds the water and it causes flooding. And oh, come on, stop it.
All right. Well, let's finish on something nice and jolly, because I know I find this amazing. You retired quite a while back. In fact, I remember when that all happened, and you've been busier than ever since. And one of those things is you're now a TV celebrity, aren't you? So tell me, how's that? How you found all that?
Well,
it didn't surprise me. You would struck me as someone who'd been naturally be able to do that, and that's how it's been. So
but it wasn't easy.
No,
it wasn't easy. What was a joy was that I used to watch Beach Grove, the programme we're talking about here. And the person who germinated that was Jim McCall.
Yes, I know Jim. Yeah.
Jim
recently retired, big Jim McCall.
Retired, but Jim was in many ways my distant mentor.
Right.
And he was the guy that I always kind of aspired to be like. He became a trustee of the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, when I was there, and so I got to know him a bit more there.
Incredible plants, man.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
But knowledge, just his breadth of
horticultural
knowledge was incredible.
Yeah.
He came to the Botanics as a trustee. Then eventually he was the chairman of Gardening Scotland, which was the Chelsea-like gardening show which we had at Ingliston. And then we got Beech Grove. And so I was invited to go and do a screen test. And I remember one of the screen tests I did was for the programme which they were going to do in Northern Ireland. But it turned out I was too Scottish.
Did it really? I've had the two Cockney thing many a time, mate.
But anyway, I was like a rabbit in the headlights.
Well, it worked because they've used you, and now you're steadfast on it. You must be quite well known in Scotland now, so imagine, even down south, because it's very popular down south, Beech Grove now. We get it on Sunday mornings, and people watch it. Yeah.
I can remember years ago going down to an AGM for the RHS. I was on RHS Council, and I went down to AGM at Wisley, and I walked in to the tent. And there was a lady on the door, and said, oh, you're him from, I said, from Beech Grove. Yes, she says. I said, oh, do you watch it? Said, oh, yes, I watch it every week. I said, now, where are you gardening? And she says, well, I garden on the south coast near Southampton. I says, is the programme any good to you? Oh, she says, yes. It tells me what I should have done a fortnight ago.
It's so true.
But it's a smaller space garden.
Yeah. But also I think it's very it's less magazine-y, more informative. I find it. If that makes sense to you. It's you learn things out of it. I think telly's always a danger, isn't there? Of it all being sexy shots and whatnot, and then that's one of the dangers. But saying again about Beech Grove as well, if you want gardening tips, organic gardening tips, there's plenty of them in there, isn't there, as well?
Well, we're now being quite actively going down the sustainability and the organic.
It's the way we're going, isn't it?
And peat-free.
And peat-free as well, And even you've got the big boys like the RHS are getting involved with the peat-free stuff as well. So there's no kind of turning this back, is there, really?
There isn't.
There is big improvements on peat-free composts. When I first tried to use it 20 years ago when I was at Westminster Abbey, it was useless.
It was rubbish.
It was a waste of time.
Awful. But I think too, Chris, that there is a problem. It's a question of knowing how to regulate your irrigation.
It's all down to watering, do you think, in many ways?
I think it's all down to watering. And I find that with some of the wood-based ones and the bracken and wool, you've got to be careful how you water. You have to.
That's really interesting. You say
that. It's not speaking to your plants, but it's being there every day and looking at them.
Mate, just feeling the atmosphere. I always kind of thought, I always think of watering as my bonding exercise, because that's when you're assessing what the plant's condition and all that kind of thing. Right. But it's interesting you say that. For all gardeners out there, you're using peat-free, and you're using all homemade compost, attention to irrigation is fundamental, isn't it? In some ways, it's the most skillful job a gardener does. And I'm glad, it's really nice to come up in Scotland as well. We're always down south a bit too much, so it's nice, because I have to say this, horticulture to me is very much a Scottish thing. It's ingrained in your culture, isn't it, up here? It really is. All the big collectors were Scottish, and I think it's... There
was a thing in Scotland, I think because of its religious centering.
Yeah.
The Protestant ethos in Scotland was all about sharing and so forth. So what happened was that you get people like Forsyth going down to the RHS, and they had knowledge of Scotland, and they would then, when a Scottish guy came down as a head gardener, come and work for me. So all the lords wanted to have a Scottish gardener.
Right, so they became the in thing, basically.
Because they were well educated.
Yeah.
They could read and they could write.
Yes.
And
that's really interesting.
I mean,
because Hooker set up Kew, didn't he?
But he was from Glasgow.
He was a Glaswegian, wasn't he? And Forrest and all these people were all Douglas, all Scots, weren't they?
They were Scots, and they were hardy. This was the other thing, that they don't take much to look after. They're hardy. They'll survive on next to nothing. So we'll send them off.
Yes, I mean, they can deal with that East Coast weather, mate. They'll deal with anything. Well, I'm still am to this minute very proud to have been educated in Scottish horticulture. So hopefully we take that forward, George. And really nice to be here. Really nice to see you again. Thank you for having a chat, mate. George Anderson, excellent.
Oh, that lovely Scottish voice. It's like diving into a single malt. There'll be a second chance to catch up with Chris and George later this month, when we hear the other part of their chat in the Unpruned episode. George will be walking Chris around his garden as they talk about taking cuttings and saving seeds. Be sure to press the subscribe button and you won't miss it. But now it's time to open the post bag. Chris is here with me and we're joined by Anton. Hi, both.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Anton.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Chris.
Okay, our first question. I'd like to plant a hedge, but I have a town garden. What plants would you recommend? Anton, would you like to go on this?
I think hedges are brilliant things. They're really, really underrated. I mean, they serve so many benefits. I mean, particularly for wildlife, it's a habitat for things to live in. They produce berries. They also do lots of things to abate noise, perhaps if you're in a town garden. And there's been shown that it can do stuff against air pollution as well. So I would actually go for native British species. Perhaps one of the most common things that people go for would be hawthorn. They're sort of reasonably quick going. It's got nice red berries on it for the wildlife. Perhaps also include some blackthorn in there as well, because that's particularly nice for getting the sloes on there if you like making sloe gin. I also like a dog rose in amongst that because it's got nice flowers, but also you get those lovely red berries which last through the winter. So that's just a selection of a few things. You can actually often buy native hedging mix as well. So if you can't remember all the species, then you can buy them as a mix.
Anton, I love the fact that you've gone for hedges that don't just have berries, but also have the most beautiful flowers. Hawthorn is lovely in the spring, thick with blossom. And yes, a hedge is such a good idea for wildlife. It's not just birds, but it's also small mammals, maybe hedgehogs, mice, and insects, of course, which will be able to find shelter in the leaves at the bottom of the hedge. Chris, I think it's worth talking about how to plant a hedge at this stage and also a bit of maintenance.
Certainly, yeah. Well, this is the perfect time of year as we come into the autumn to plant a hedge if you're thinking about doing it, especially if you're going to do bare root, which is how I would like to do it. Anton mentioned bundles of native plants. You can buy them as bare root from probably a local nursery, so your carbon footprint will be quite low. And that means it doesn't come in a pot. It comes in a bundle wrapped in hessian, and it comes as whips. So a whip is a very young plant, a very young tree. So if you've got a blackthorn or a hawthorn, it would come maybe as a 1-year-old plant, and it'd be about maybe a foot and a half. But how I'd practically go about it is first I would measure the area I wanted to put the hedge, and I'd put down a line. I'd put 2 pins in a line. Originally, you would have dug a trench and you would have composted that trench. You'd put some good organic matter in. You'd fork that into the bottom of the trench and put the soil back. For those of you who are lovers of no dig, which I quite understand, just put the compost on the top Okay, so let the worms pull it into the soil. But you put that line down for a reason, because you've obviously then you can calculate how many whips you need. I would plant always on a stagger with my whips, okay? So I put them 30 centimetres apart, left, right, left, right, left, right, either side of the line. So you've got what's going to happen as those plants start to grow, they'll knit together, they'll bond, and they'll start to form your hedge. Once you've got those whips in, the first thing I do come the next spring as they start to put on growth is I would get rid of the apical dominance, that first shoot down to the first bud. So I would knit the top out just so you get them to laterally shoot, okay? So if you, in your mind's eye, if you can imagine, you've got this stagger of plants 30 centimetres apart in a sort of diamond formation. As they grow, you knock the top out, they then put on lateral growth and they start to knit together. And as the season goes on, start to nip out the laterals, which are the side branches, to encourage that thickening. Be very aware when you cut your hedge, if you're pruning out the side, that May tends to be bird nesting time. There'll be full of birds in there, so be careful not to cut or interfere with that. Make sure you do it later in the season.
Oh, wonderful, Chris. That was put so beautifully. I think the other thing I like about the hedge is that it softens boundaries. And I think if you have a town garden, you've probably got a fence or a wall between your neighbours. And how lovely to soften that hard landscape. Would you agree, Anton?
Yeah, it certainly does soften the boundaries. You've got some nice sort of green rather than that sort of stark appearance of the fence. I've lived in perhaps some of the rougher areas of cities in the past as well. It's a very good deterrent for people leaping over fences into your garden.
Yeah.
Cutting through blackthorn, which has quite nice spikes on it, doesn't it, Anton? Would probably give you a shock if you tried to cut through it.
It's just that thing, make your place a little bit more difficult than your neighbours to get into.
Well, I hope that's inspired our listener. Actually, whichever garden you're in, whether it's town or country, I think hedges bring huge benefits. Okay, moving on. This is a nice one. My wife says I should leave the spiders, who seem to be all over my potting shed and in the greenhouse. Do you agree? Chris, what do you think?
I think so. I think, hey, kids, leave them spiders alone. I'm not a great expert on spiders. I have a lot of them on the allotment now. As the autumn kicks in and the sun gets lower, the garden spider, well, I don't know its Latin name, its scientific name, but sort of brown with white speckles. It sits right in the centre of the web, but the web is incredibly beautiful. I'm always amazed at the amount of effort that goes into it. Nature, it always staggers you, doesn't it? That this small thing has just built this incredible thing, and you get the dew on it and the morning sun through it.
Anton, are you afraid of spiders?
I absolutely adore spiders. I always have done from a young age, really. They're a masterpiece in hydraulic engineering as well. Yeah, we need to respect them, basically.
I've never heard them described like that, I have to say.
That.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of spiders as well. I think it's worth knowing that not all of them weave webs as well. We've got things like the wolf spider, which actually relies on pouncing on its prey as well. And then there's the nursery web spider we find in our gardens, but it only builds a web just to look after its young. It makes a little tent for all its babies to live in.
I think the thing to remember is that spiders very rarely in this country are a threat to humans. And yes, they are brilliant at keeping down flies, aphids, wasps, any other sort of pest, what you might consider a pest in your greenhouse or in your potting shed. So I'm with the wife on this one. Leave the spiders.
I think it's interesting that they're one of those creatures that humanity is somehow demonised. You know, like when I worked in Africa, the snakes were incredibly important because they keep down the rodent populations. And there's always a reason for these things to be there, rather than myths and ghost stories or whatever we make up about them. And a spider's web on an autumn day, what a sight that is.
Okay, our last one, and I particularly like this one. What is your best advice for ripening green tomatoes? Anton, what do you do with your green tomatoes?
Well, I must admit, I put them in a fruit bowl with the other fruit, because I know that there's a gas called ethene which comes off ripe bananas and apples, which will help to ripen those fruits. Some people say they would put them in a drawer to increase that effect, to sort of increase the amount of that gas around them. But personally, I don't like doing that, because then I can't see them and I'm likely to forget about them. I like to keep my eye on them as well, because it is important that you make sure that you remove any ones which are damaged or diseased. Sometimes I find the ones later in the season, there might be a few ones which are split, and those ones obviously are going to not keep so well.
Chris, are you a drawer person or a fruit bowl person?
I'm absolutely a fruit ball person. I agree. You put them in a drawer and I would forget about them. I think there's more chance of them sweating, the humidity around them. You might get moulds in there. I had quite a lot of green tomatoes this year. I think one important tip I have, as I've learnt this the hard way, is if you juggle them in the bowl. Okay, juggle your tomatoes, which just basically means move them around, because the ones on the bottom might get a bit sweaty, a bit forgotten, and they're more likely to go mildewy.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, because we seem to have a sort of innate fear of a green tomato, hoping that it will turn red. But in fact, the green tomato is perfectly edible. It's not like a green potato, which might be poisonous. And not only are they edible, but they actually can be quite delicious. Well, we all know about green tomato chutney, but I make a really good green tomato salsa, which involves mashing them up with lemon, garlic, and parsley. It's really tart, really good. Anton, are you a chutney fan?
I do like chutney, but sometimes I don't always have the time to make it. It's a bit of a time investment. So what I like to do is fry them up with a little bit of garlic and some mushrooms and have them on toast. And it's the sort of tartness of the green tomatoes goes really well with the mushrooms.
Great. So all you out there like me who've got bunches of green tomatoes, don't panic. Put them in the fruit bowl or just get eating them. Thank you, guys. I think that's everything for this month. Thanks a lot. See you again next month.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
So now we've come to the end. If you want to follow up on any of the topics we've discussed, visit the Garden Organic website. There's plenty of growing advice there, and you can also find out how to become a member of Garden Organic. We'll support you every step of the way on your organic growing journey. Just go to gardenorganic.org.uk. Next month, we'll be watching the discussions at COP26, so we'd like to give you suggestions on what we can all do to look after our growing areas in the most sustainable way. And Chris gets enthusiastic about bees. And finally, my thanks to the Organic Gardening Catalogue for sponsoring us, and to you for listening. Have a wonderful autumnal October. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for providing the music.